Okay, hello everyone. I love this turnout because it's, what is it, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I don't even know what time zone I'm on. 4 o'clock in the afternoon in June, and here you are. You guys are truly dedicated to the fundamental freedoms. Thank you so much for coming to this event today. We're deeply grateful. I am Evelyn Farkas. I'm the executive director of the McCain Institute, and we are really proud of this report. We've tried 3 times to have this rollout on Capitol Hill. It's really important to us because our #1 audience are the policymakers, and our authors put a lot of time and attention into this report with the policymakers and with policymaking in mind. The report is called The State of Religious Freedom Worldwide, an inside look at the axis of upheavals, religious persecution, and how the U.S. can counteract it. So it's very much oriented towards practical methods and legislation, frankly. Unfortunately, Senator Tillis is not able to be with us. He had a family emergency, but we are very excited that Senator Coons will be here. The 2 of them co-chair the very important bipartisan Senate Human Rights Caucus, and this is a champion organization. They're both champions of international religious freedom. I'm going to introduce Senator Coons in a few minutes, and we are deeply grateful again that he could be here. I'm going to say a little bit about your resume, but suffice it to say, he reminded me that, of course, he's chairing the ranking member on the Defense of Probes Committee. So Iran, and a lot of other things. So it's really important for him to not be distracted too much by other things, because it's really important to get that right, because it also impacts on human rights, fundamental human rights. His remarks will be followed by a panel discussion, and we're very excited. We have our own Alexis Mrachek. She is in charge of this task force and of our work on human rights and religious freedom, and she's going to moderate it. We, as I mentioned, tried to have the rollout in October, but the government shut down, so of course we could not do anything in the government facility. Then we tried to do it in January, and there was a crazy winter storm, so we rescheduled again. So, but we are, if nothing else, persistent, and we're here, and this is just the beginning. So I want you all to know, while there's not a huge audience necessarily physically here with us, first of all, the world is watching. We have global reach through our McCain Institute network, through our website, through all of our global leaders that we've trained over the years. We've been in existence for 12 years, but also through our partnerships, through the phenomenal minds that are sitting here who will talk to you about this work. We have great reach beyond this room. People will see this report multiple times, and we will work closely with our lawmaker friends to ensure that action is taken, that this report is not just a report that goes on someone's shelf, that it is a living, breathing thing. And so it's not just an event, it's not just a report for this event. We are actually going to make change with it. So I really am grateful to all of you for being here today and for committing just by your presence. This is in the spirit of Senator John McCain. He deeply cared about religious freedom. During his 2008 speech at Oakland University in Michigan, he declared, quote, "There is no right more fundamental to free society than the free practice of religion. No society that denies religious freedom can ever rightly claim to be good in some other way." So, we all know, I don't need to tell you, and the senator might tell you, that religious freedom is in crisis today. The axis of upheaval, this is a term, whether you like it or not, basically these autocrats working together, Russia, China, Iran, in the first instance, and North Korea, they have been actively persecuting their citizens, but they're not happy to just persecute people within their borders. They work together, and they work beyond their borders, and it's nefarious. So we're going to hear more about how they are doing this. The other point that I'd like to make is there is overlap with some of the other work that the McCain Institute does. We have a Freedom for Political Prisoners initiative where we advocate loudly and vociferously for the release of people who are being imprisoned because of their beliefs, including their religious beliefs and their practice of religion. We have 3 Christians Chinese Christians that we are advocating for. We have a sort of short list. We work with other organizations on lots of cases, but we advocate specifically for specific people. Pastor Jin, who is a Chinese pastor, he is on our list, along with Pastor Gua Quanfu and his wife Pang Yu. So know that the issue of religious freedom also translates into other work we're doing, and I think I probably will leave it at that, although, it is important to note for those who don't follow, for example, what Iran does. I mean, we supposedly had regime change in Iran, but we continue to have persecution of all kinds of peoples, the Baha, the Yarshanis, the Mandians, and others inside of Iran. And of course, we know about the Russian Federation, the bombing of churches and mosques in Ukraine, the imprisonment and torture of Ukrainian religious leaders. And then actually we should mention the disinformation, because we found that in our trips. We would bring members of Congress or their staff, and the staff had received briefings from, or seen Russian propaganda that basically said that there's no religious freedom in Ukraine, when it's the other way around. The Russian government basically harasses, maybe persecutes too strong, but they definitely harass members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, Jehovah's Witnesses, and then, of course, the non-Orthodox communities in Russia also are treated as second class in many cases. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, and of course, this is just the beginning, as I said, but we are really so grateful to have Senator Coons here. It's a sign of his dedication to the late Senator McCain and his memory and his legacy, but also to many of the issues that connect them across the aisle, one of which is religious freedom. As I mentioned, the senator is a member of the Appropriations Committee, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and vice chairman, as I said, of the Select Committee on Ethics, or maybe I didn't mention that one. So he's in a really powerful position to make change and to use his megaphone. He is, of course, working on the hard side of this as well. Deterrence is as important as anything else. These autocrats must be countered, also using technology. He's the co-chair, as I mentioned, of the Senate Human Rights Caucus with Senator Tillis. And also this fact I found in your resume, that you have a master's in ethics from the Yale Divinity School. So that gives you special gravitas on this particular issue set. We are really grateful, Senator Coons, for everything that you do every day, not just for your great state of Delaware, but for Americans and, frankly, citizens, people all over the world. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you to everyone associated with the McCain Institute for keeping alive and vibrant and relevant and timely John's memory. I actually occupy what was Senator McCain's office. He was the last occupant before me. And I've set up my office, should you ever come and visit, such that when I sit down for a meeting, I see my first trip with him to Afghanistan on one shelf and my last trip with him to Vietnam on another shelf. And I imagine him storming into the office saying, "Get out, Coons, it's my place," with a twinkle. And a fierce dedication to the values and principles that I think are at the core of the founding of our republic 250 years ago, not least of which is religious freedom. Unlike so many of the countries from which so many of the immigrants to the United States came back then and are still coming today and should be allowed to come in the future, freedom of conscience, freedom of affiliation, freedom to decide, to believe, to worship, to practice as you want is often one of the most powerful values, opportunities that attracts people to our nation. And John is someone who I sat in awe of, and he was kind enough to let me travel with him on a dozen occasions. And I got to see and hear and experience how he engaged with folks around the world and how he lived the values. He was a fierce partisan. He was a very capable politician. He ran and won many campaigns, but he also showed a sense of humility, grace, and engagement with others that I think should be a role model for all of us. I am convinced, as was he, that what makes America great is its principles, that this is a nation founded on a few core ideas, not least of which is the opening sentences of both the Declaration and the Constitution, which are well worth a reread as we come right up against celebrating 250 years. I was going to give you a little quote, if I could, to encourage you in your persistence, given that this is the third attempt at releasing this study. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for if we persist, we will in due time reap a great harvest. That's Galatians 6:9, something I shared in a funeral of a dear friend of mine just last week, because it requires persistence. It requires patience. It requires raising up names and pushing back. And to your point about the coalition of nations, North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, that are increasingly reinforcing each other's repressive views of the rights of the individual and the individual in relation to the state, we have to continue to engage on this front. I've been so grateful for the friendship and partnership of Senator Thom Tillis as the co-chair of the bipartisan Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Caucus, here in the Senate. I have tried, so far unsuccessfully, but yet I will persist, to create a commission named for John that would actually have staffing and support and the ability to be the effective mirror to the Lantos Commission on the House side. So far, the work of the Human Rights Caucus has required dedicated staff from my office and Tom's, and Elizabeth Boyle's here with us today, and she'll wave to the crowd with great pomp and circumstance. As you have ideas and thoughts for what we can and should be doing with the caucus through the rest of this Congress and into the next, we'd welcome, value, and appreciate that. Tom's been a great partner from our first conversation about this. Pastor Brunson, who was I believe is still a Christian pastor from North Carolina, but was imprisoned unjustly in Turkey, was a real pressing concern for him. He and I have raised up concerns about folks who are imprisoned for their beliefs and their values in a number of countries. Ekpat Asat, a Uyghur imprisoned in China, is someone who we've both worked on and who I have lifted up as a prisoner of conscience and raised with PRC leaders at all levels. There's also another important piece of legislative work not yet fully done, which is to reauthorize the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. It is longstanding, it is bipartisan, but there have been too many things that fit that description, longstanding, bipartisan, that have been allowed to fall by the wayside or fundamentally restructured, from the Institute of Peace to the Africa Development Foundation. So we cannot take for granted that this commission will be reauthorized, and we welcome your voice and your encouragement. And then last point, many of you may know that Senator Tillis is retiring after this session. I am looking for and eager to find a good, vibrant Republican, I'll take any partner, but a Republican partner willing to participate. One of the marks of Tom's partnership with me in the Human Rights Caucus is that he delighted in showing up and speaking at events and was often engaging and compelling. Although most of the important and valuable work of this place is done by staff and with no knowledge or approval from their relevant senators. I'm getting a narrowing of the eyes over there from Maddie. What was great about Tom was that he reinforced the importance of what he was doing by reinforcing to his home state, to his caucus, and to his staff that he valued it. Often we show what we value by where we go. I'm showing that I value the work of the McCain Institute, the memory and legacy of John McCain, and what you're doing in releasing this report and continuing to elevate a sustained bipartisan engagement around religious liberty by having joined you today, by thanking you, and by continuing to invest in timely, qualified action by my staff in sustaining this work. My last thought will be that Cindy McCain, one of the greatest of the many gifts I've received through friendship with John was to really get to know and work with Cindy. She's just retired from her leadership of the World Food Program, and I cannot think of a greater way to put faith into action. Whether you're a humanist, a Baha'i, a Quaker, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Jew, a Catholic, feeding the hungry in need around the world is something that literally comes forward from what is the best in the human spirit of all traditions and backgrounds, and is only the most brutish regimes that try to use hunger as a weapon of war. And so I'm so grateful for Cindy's service as well, and look forward to continuing to be a part, Evelyn, of whatever the McCain Institute does in the future, but I am certain it will continue to uplift religious liberty. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Coons, for being here today. And thanks again to Senator Tillis and his office for their support. They were the ones who sponsored this room and let us use this beautiful space for this event today. My name is Alexis Mrachek, and I'm the Senior Program Manager of the Human Rights and Freedom Program here at the McCain Institute. And I led the effort on this report last year with the help of Knox Thames, who is here today. He was my advisor and co-editor on the report. If my panelists could please take their seats, we will begin our panel discussion in just a moment. Thank you. The axis of upheaval is a term used to describe the four major threats of the world: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. While known for their political oppression, both at home and transnationally, these four dictatorships also work independently and together to commit severe acts of religious persecution. Senator John McCain was a steadfast proponent of international religious freedom, which is why the McCain Institute commissioned this report to shed light on the axis of upheaval's persecution of religion. 9 authors, including myself, penned chapters from different angles describing explicitly the axis of upheaval's acts of repression against a number of religious groups, including Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Christians like Catholics and Baptists, as well as members of the Baha'i community, Falun Gong practitioners, and others. For ease of access for busy policymakers, we kept each chapter under 2,000 words, including recommendations for the US government. We hope this format will allow robust engagement here on Capitol Hill and inspire action on the legislative front. And while we release the report on October 27th, which is International Religious Freedom Day, the recommendations for greater engagement by the United States have only grown more salient. I encourage you all to look at the report on the McCain Institute's website. It's very easy to find. Before we get started with our discussion, I want to introduce our amazing panelists, who are all noteworthy experts in the foreign policy and human rights community. First, I have here on my left Knox Thames. He is an advisor and the co-editor on the report and one of our authors. He is an international human rights lawyer, advocate, and author. He spent 20 years in U.S. governmental positions advocating for religious freedom abroad, including at the State Department and 2 foreign policy commissions. Known for his expertise and nonpartisan approach, both the Obama and Trump administrations appointed Knox as a special advisor for religious minorities in the Near East and South and Central Asia at the State Department. Since leaving government service in 2020, Knox has written extensively on human rights and religious freedom. His articles and commentary have appeared in multiple outlets. His book, Ending Persecution: Charting the Path to Global Religious Freedom, was published in 2024. In April 2026, he was named the inaugural executive director of the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom, an initiative of Dallas Baptist University with offices in both Texas and Washington, D.C. Next, we have Jewher Ilham, who is an author and an advocate for the Uyghur community and for her imprisoned father, Uyghur economist Ilham Tohti. She works at the Worker Rights Consortium as forced labor project manager and serves as a spokesperson for the coalition to end forced labor in the Uyghur region. She has testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and published op-eds in multiple outlets. She received Freedom United's Campaigner of the Year Award in 2024 and was awarded the 2025 Sullivan Human Rights Award from the National Immigrant Justice Center. She has also accepted numerous awards on behalf of her father. She has published 2 books, one on her personal experiences and one on the Uyghur struggle. She is also a co-producer and protagonist for the groundbreaking and award-winning documentary film, All Static and Noise, about the plight of Uyghurs, and that came out in 2023. On her left is Olivia Enos, who is a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, where she writes on a wide range of human rights and national security issues in Asia. She is also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and a contributor at Forbes. She previously worked out as Washington Director for the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, and before that as Senior Policy Analyst for Asian Studies at the Heritage Foundation, where she wrote about international human rights issues, including human trafficking, transnational crime, religious freedom, and democratic freedoms, among other social issues in China, North Korea, Burma, and other parts of Asia. Olivia received her MA in Asian Studies from Georgetown University and her BA in Government from Patrick Henry College. And last but not least, we have Dr. Peter Mandeville, who is Professor of International Affairs and Director of the Abu Suleiman Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason University, a Senior Research Fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and non-resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. His government experience includes serving as a member of the State Department's policy planning staff Senior Advisor in the Secretary of State's Office of Religion and Global Affairs, and Director of the Center for Faith-Based Partnerships at USAID. His other affiliations have included the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Brookings Institution, the RAND Corporation, the Pew Research Center, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He is the author or editor of multiple books, has contributed to several outlets online, and has testified before the U.S. Congress. He is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you all for being here today. To kick us off, I want to start with Knox's chapter, as it is the introductory overview chapter to the report and sets the scene for how China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are repressing religious freedom. Knox, in your chapter, you say that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea's policies are antithetical to fundamental freedoms and oppress millions, particularly those wishing to pursue the truth as their conscience dictates, and that each of these regimes enforces certain forms of religious practice over its population and punishes those who deviate from this desired spiritual conformity. None of this has changed since our report's publication in October. In broad terms, could you describe the modes in which these four regimes operate, including how they all enforce certain forms of religious practice and punish those who do not conform?
Well, first, I just want to thank the McCain Institute for commissioning this report. I think it's a very timely, as we were sort of joking in a funny, not funny way. While we've had 3 attempts to get to this moment, the conditions in the countries really haven't changed. In fact, they might have gotten worse. And when I started my chapter, the question I posed was, if you were to go outside of this building or in front of Union Station and ask passersby, name 4 of the worst countries in the world, they'd probably name these 4. Like, it's sort of common knowledge amongst the American public that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are bad guys, they're bad actors, they're opposed to our values, they're opposed to human rights. And I found this great quote from Senator McCain from his book, The Restless Wave, which is a great read. And he says, "The character of states can't be separated from their conduct in the world." And I think that's so true. The way that they act in one area means they're going to act in a negative way in a different area. So it's not surprising that all 4 of these countries are religious persecution machines, that they expend incredible amounts of energy to repress their own people, to limit their own people's ability to pursue truth as their conscience leads without fear of discrimination or violence. So in China, we've seen incredible repression, with no parallel since World War II. The industrial scale persecution of the Uyghur Muslim community truly shocks the conscience. It's unbelievable. But also the way that the Chinese Communist Party looks to quash the independent practice of Christianity, Tibetan Buddhist culture, and other faiths is also further evidence of their malintent, their desire to want to limit the outlooks of their people and to focus them on Chairman Xi. Now, while China nominally holds to a communist ideology, the next country that the report looks at, Iran, is a theocracy. And the Ayatollahs, since 1979, have gone after the Baha'i community with really an unholy vengeance. And that's only accelerated since the events of October 7th. But like as with China, one community's persecution isn't limited. The Christian community, the Sunni Muslim community, the Shia majority community, women who don't want to wear the scarf, they also face religious repression and limitations on what they believe. And while Iran is theocratic, North Korea requires the worship of the Kim family. Before the Korean War, Pyongyang was known as the Jerusalem of the East. There were so many churches there. But since the Kim's family taking over, there's no freedom in the country, let alone religious freedom. And the chapter that Olivia wrote really spells out how horrible the situation is for Christians. And there's just no room for competing worldviews other than venerating the Kim family. And then lastly, Russia, while not as ideologically rigid as the other 3, exerts its control over religious practice across that vast nation. Putin has co-opted the Russian Orthodox Church to make it a tool of the state. Now, there's always the comparison, well, it's not as bad as it was during the atheistic Soviet period, but that's damning with faint praise. And the way that Putin has manipulated the Russian Orthodox Church to justify the invasion of Ukraine, to exert an influence over the spiritual life of Russians runs clearly afoul of international standards. And we also see in the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine an effort to eradicate any non-Russian Orthodox practice of faith. And then in the free parts of Ukraine, the government, Russian forces, purposely targeting Ukrainian religious sites. So the report, each of the authors go into great detail about this, and we'll hear some of those findings later, but we also have answers, or we have some ideas. And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in the second round, about what do we do? We don't just identify the problem, but we also try to identify some solutions, and there's a unique role for the United States to play in each of these countries to help push forward and push back the forces of persecution.
Thank you so much, Knox. That's a great way to tee us up for this discussion today. Jewher, now let's turn to you. You and your family personally have experienced repression by the Chinese Communist Party just for being Uyghurs. Can you tell us about how the CCP is persecuting Uyghurs today, restricting their Muslim faith, and about your personal story, including the persecution of your father? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. So many folks think the persecution of the Uyghur people really started after 2018, 2019, when it was first widely reported in the Western world. However, the Chinese government's repressive tactics against the Muslim communities have started way, way, way before. And my father started reporting and documenting and researching on these issues since the 90s when he was a college student. And that got him into a lot of trouble. Growing up, I had bugging devices in our living room. I was followed to my middle school, high school. We were house arrested multiple times. We were held incommunicado. And it was a normality for me to come back from my boarding school one day and found no one has been home for weeks. And as a teenager, and for no one there to be taken care of me for. And that, my father was still very hopeful. He never stopped. He never gave up. In fact, I would have to say now that he was naively thinking that when Xi Jinping starts taking office in 2013, things would become better. And he actually, quote unquote, "There's so much hope. Things will become better under Chairman Xi. The Uyghurs will be able to breathe again." In fact, what happened was that Uyghur people not only was not able to breathe again, but in fact, we were suffocated even more than before. We know that in 2014, Xi Jinping visited the Uyghur region and started enacting a series of campaigns targeting the religious communities in the Uyghur region. And, China is officially an atheist state, but according to the Chinese constitutional law, all individuals have the right to practice religion. But Xi Jinping, when he gained authorities in the office, he decided that religion can undermine the authorities and can be served as an alternative to communism, so that it should not be allowed in practice. It can only exist in a more symbolic way. For example, religious communities like the Uyghur community and Tibetan communities, we can only exist by colorful clothing, having feathers on our head, having exotic dances and music and food. That's about the most extent that we're allowed to present every bit of uniqueness of our culture or to practice, to observe our religion. And in 2015, the Chairman Xi called for the Sinicization of all religion in China, and particularly after this call for Sinicization, we've seen a major expansion of detention facilities in the Uyghur region, where the result is at least 1.8 million population in the Uyghur region were mass incarcerated. My father, in 2014, he was one of the people that slowly disappeared. He was one of the first scholars that were targeted, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He's still in prison. No family members are allowed to visit him. No lawyers are allowed to visit him. In fact, since 2017, we have heard no news of him. I don't know if he is alive. I would hope so. I pray for it every day. I wake up in the morning, try my best to stay hopeful, although it's getting harder and harder and harder when you see not only my family is being persecuted, but you're seeing hundreds of thousands of Uyghur families, daughters are being separated from, and sons are separated from their loved ones. Uyghur children are being sent to state-run orphanages. Why? Because just like when I was a teenager, when I came home, I was not cared for because my parents were sent to a detention facility or house arrest. Those Uyghur children, they had to be sent to state-run orphanages because their parents were sent to, state-run forced labor facilities, working whether it's in their homeland or even to transfer outside of the Uyghur region to cities like, export-oriented cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shandong, Guangzhou, where they're working nonstop, not getting paid at all, or paid way below the minimum wage and under extreme conditions. And their children will grow up in those state-run boarding schools, not speaking a word of Uyghur, not practicing our religion, not knowing what it means to be Uyghur, to how to preserve our identity, and eventually not remember who they are. On the streets in the Uyghur region a few years ago, you will see that there's still Uyghur women who wear headscarves, whether it's in a traditional cultural way or religious ways, and you will see women will be in longer skirts. But after routine patrol visits of Chinese authorities ripping long skirts off women on the streets, and you will see men in beard asked to be shaved off during Ramadan, where our holy month, where Muslims are supposed to be fasting and praying, and obviously have to stay away from alcohol and anything of those sorts, where Uyghur are forced to drink alcohol, even participate in alcohol drinking contests to prove their loyalty and that they are not so-called religious extremists during the holy month of Ramadan, and just to survive. And this became the reality of the Uyghur people, Uyghur families like mine. I'm considered one of the lucky ones. I was able to escape China. I'm the only person in my family that was able to leave, and I have a voice in this country where I could speak up. But there's many, many, many more Uyghur people who are left to not be able to. They're silenced. They don't have a voice. This morning, I was able to call my mother, and she told me that I feel so stuck. She was denied, but her passport was confiscated. So she's not allowed to go back. She's too scared to go back to the Uyghur region because of potential of getting arrested. She lives in Beijing. And she does not have a passport, so she can't come to find me and be reunited with me. And she said, I've been retired. All my friends are scared of me because of my ties to you and because I was previously married to your father 25 years ago. And I am lonely, but hopefully, there's a saying in Uyghur, in God's will, Khudayim buyursa, but she said, partir buyursa, which is, if the Communist Party wishes, I will be able to travel this year to cities like, for tourism, which I found this morning very troublesome, that we're not allowed to simply express in God's will. If God allows, we can't say any expressions like this, whether it's because of religious meaning or not. You have to say, if Xi Jinping allows, if party allows, if communism allows. That's a reality.
That's so difficult, Jewher. Thank you so much for telling your story. And I can't even imagine what you and your family go through on a day-to-day basis. But we really appreciate you telling us about it. Olivia, now I want to turn to you. In your chapter in the report, you wrote specifically about the Kim regime's severe persecution of Christians. Could you please describe what this persecution looks day to day for Christians living in North Korea?
Thank you, Alexis. I need to turn this on. Can you hear me now? Okay. Alexis, thank you so much for hosting this today, and to the McCain Institute for giving us this platform to discuss religious freedom. My topic today is North Korea, and North Korea, bar none, is the world's worst persecutor of Christians. They've earned this distinction from Open Doors World Watch List for the past 25 years. And yet, people in North Korea still continue to practice the Christian faith. There are an estimated 200 to 400,000 North Korean Christians today. It's very difficult to estimate given the close nature of the regime, but because many people are having to practice their faith in private. But the average Christian in North Korea faces immense persecution. Now, I can tell you this all day long, but I think sharing a story will help to connect with what an ordinary North Korean really experiences. I first heard the story of Hyuna-ji at the International Religious Freedom Ministerial, the first one that was held by then Ambassador at Large Sam Brownback. And in that, Hyuna-ji described having tried to escape North Korea on 4 separate occasions. On each 3 of those occasions, she was repatriated back to North Korea, and each repatriation came with immense hardship, time in ordinary prison camps, time being tortured, time being subject to forced labor. And on her 3rd attempt to escape when she was repatriated, unfortunately, she was pregnant. And when it was discovered that she was pregnant, she was forced to abort her unborn child. Now, Ms. Hyuna-ji has gone on to live an incredible life. She finally successfully made it to South Korea, and she herself is a bold advocate for freedom of information, for freedom of religion, but she was an unusual person in that she had read the Bible prior to leaving North Korea, and in part she faced such severe persecution on the basis of her faith, including the loss of her firstborn child. She's but one of the North Korean escapees, many of whom have sought to find freedom beyond North Korea's borders. And according to the United Nations Commission of Inquiry report, which was produced in 2014, people who are trying to flee North Korea are asked 2 questions. They're asked, 1, whether or not they have interfaced with a South Korean, and 2nd, whether or not they've interfaced with a missionary. And if the answer is yes to either of those questions, they face extreme and severe treatment upon repatriation, just like that of Hyuna-ji. So the big question is, why does the regime persecute people of faith? Well, the North Korean leaders fear religious belief, whether it's Christianity or some other religion, and they fear it for 2 very specific reasons. One, the regime's power, as Knox referenced, is predicated on deity-like worship of the Kim regime. So worshiping anything else is viewed as a threat to the regime's power. Second, North Korean leadership has a long memory. They remember the role of peaceful protesters, Catholic and Christian protesters during the fall of the Soviet Union, and they fear that they will face the same demise should they allow religion to continue to spread. As a consequence, the regime goes to great lengths to quell Christian practice, and I should be clear, they go to great lengths to quell other forms of religious practice too. But there are an estimated 50,000 to 60,000 Christians who are imprisoned in ordinary prisons today. Beyond this, many Christians are sent to political prison camps, and being sent to a political prison camp is essentially a death sentence. When I was doing the research for this report, there was one story that recalled a family, a mother, a father, and a 2-year-old daughter who were sent to a political prison camp for practicing Christianity. A 2-year-old. I have a 3-year-old and a 17-month-old at home. I honestly cannot imagine this. Beyond this, North Koreans are also publicly executed for possessing a Bible or for practicing Christianity. As recently as 2022, the U.S. Department of State documented the execution of even a Korean Workers' Party member before an audience of 3,000 individuals simply for possessing a Bible. Christians face severe torture and treatment simply on the basis of being Christian. Given the uniquely terrible treatment that Christians in North Korea face, I believe it is very possible that they are subject not just to crimes against humanity, which was well established from the COI report in 2014, but that Christians uniquely may be subject to another atrocity crime, genocide. Even the limited facts that are available about Christians in North Korea suggest that North Korean Christians face genocide because they already face 2 of the 5 genocidal acts, including killing and serious bodily or mental harm. A determination of genocide only requires that one of these acts be committed, and contrary to common understanding of the definition, does not require mass killings. In fact, a determination of genocide hinges on intent to destroy a group on the basis, in this case, of course, would be on religion. I'll leave that here, but I just wanted to give people a broader understanding of what Christians are facing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was super informative just to hear more about the personal experiences that Christians sadly face every day. It's just so horrible what they're going through. Peter, I want to turn to you. To tie it all together, you wrote that the three strategic rivals, China, Russia, and Iran, are advancing their global agendas through religion. You cover the role of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Federation and Moscow's projection of traditional values, China's religious repression at home and abroad, and Iran's revolutionary theology and transnational Shia networks. Could you briefly elaborate on these three and explain how these rivals are advancing their agendas through religious repression?
Yeah, thanks very much, Alexis, and thanks to the McCain Institute for bringing us together. I think the fact that we're gathered together is testament to the fact that neither U.S. government shutdowns nor winter blizzards can defeat human rights. I guess I'm coming at these questions from a slightly different angle. From my co-panelists and co-authors, we've heard very powerful stories, including personal stories, about the ways in which countries such as China, North Korea, Russia have directly oppressed particular religious groups, circumscribed the ability of people of diverse faith and religious beliefs to practice their faith traditions. What I tried to offer in my contribution is a greater sense of awareness of the growing geopolitical resonance of religion more broadly. The fact that we're engaging these issues at a time in which more and more countries are starting to use religion as an instrument of statecraft in order to advance certain kinds of agendas. And I think when it comes to how we think about and practice the promotion of international religious freedom, it's vitally important to be aware of that broader landscape. So for example, we touched already on the Russian Orthodox Church and the ways in which there's grown over the last 20 years to be a very close symbiotic relationship between the Kremlin and the Russian Orthodox Church. And various forms of global outreach through the auspices of the Russian Orthodox Church has become an important way in which the regime of Vladimir Putin has tried to represent itself to the world as a sort of protector and guardian of Western civilization and as a protector of traditional and family values. And I have seen firsthand through my work at USAID, for example, some of the ways in which mis and disinformation associated with these activities have directly interfered with the ability of U.S. government through incredibly important programs such as PEPFAR to deliver life-saving assistance to millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. And what I mean by that is mis and disinformation campaigns that involve spreading the word that if you want to receive retroviral drugs through these programs, you have to sign forms in which you affirm the rights of LGBTQ people and testify that you support same-sex marriage. Obviously not true, but consistent with the ways in which Russia has sought to implement religious and instrumental ways. When we think of China, you think of a country that has comprehensively suppressed expressions of religion and belief. You think of mass atrocities being committed against the Uyghur populations. However, there's an aspect of Chinese geopolitical conduct today that is actually about the deployment of religious soft power that involves providing funding for the construction of Buddhist temples across the Belt and Road geography. Efforts by China to reach out to strategically valuable countries in which there are significant Buddhist populations, using the cultural heritage of Chinese Buddhism as a soft power tool. Likewise, China has more recently, and even more counterintuitively, I think, started to talk about ways in which officially sinicized and state-sponsored forms of Christianity might become a form of Chinese religious export product in certain countries and regions such as Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. I think these are aspects of the geopolitical resonances of religion that just tend not to be on our radars. And finally, when it comes to Iran, I think this one is a really tricky one for the United States. We are used to, and it's appropriate to focus on some of the very legitimate concerns around Iranian support for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the threat, as we saw it, primarily of the export of a sort of radical religious ideology. But Iran has also been very sophisticated in the way that it has used religion as a soft power tool, not just exporting a particular theological revolutionary project, but also using the distinct history of Shia communities around the world historically and their persecution as a way to create narratives about counter-hegemonic activism and anti-imperialism that has allowed Iran's religious identity to become a source of solidarity with a broad range of communities and peoples around the world that feel oppression. So I think part of what I'm trying to alert us to is that this isn't just about calling out human rights violations and violations of religious freedom. It's about doing so in an emerging world order in which the geopolitical resonance of religion is evolving very quickly and in fundamentally different ways.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was a great way to tie everyone's remarks up. Now, I know that we're short on time, so we'll do sort of a rapid fire here, just a couple minutes apiece. But Knox, how do you think the U.S. government should be thinking about China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea's acts of religious persecution? What should lawmakers be focusing on specifically?
Well, the United States is the indispensable actor when it comes to advancing religious freedom and human rights. And when we're not engaged in a robust way, people suffer. These malign actors are able to advance their agendas that are against our interests, and people suffer. So unfortunately, there's a series of tools that Congress gave the executive branch through the International Religious Freedom Act that are going unused right now. The first Trump administration took the IRF agenda to unprecedented levels with the ministerials, the alliances that were launched, adding to the country of particular concern list. During the Biden administration, they maintained much of that, but it started to slip towards the end in that the Biden administration didn't issue the last CPC designations. And for both Trump 1 and the Biden administration, none of the sanction tools that the CPC designation allows were activated, which is more the historic norm than otherwise. But unfortunately, the second Trump administration, when we thought it would pick up where it left off, and they said as much, has not pursued international religious freedom with anywhere close to the same amount of vigor. There was a report that just came out by a Congressional Research Service that highlighted how the Trump administration has not issued for 2 years now the International Religious Freedom Report. That has never happened in the history of the International Religious Freedom Act regime in over a quarter of a century. And while the report isn't the sexiest form of U.S. diplomacy, it's incredibly useful because it touches every country in the world. And I can tell you, as someone who's been on the other side of meetings with governments that don't like what our reports say, they read it, they don't like it, and it's a tool to get them to change their behavior. And that tool is not being used right now. The CPC designations, none have been made by the Trump administration with the exception of Nigeria, which was long overdue. But there are 12 other countries, including all 4 of these, that have yet to be redesignated, have yet to have any focused international or diplomatic attention. And then, of course, you've had the shrinking of U.S. government funding. There was an RFP that just came out on Nigeria, but nothing else. And the demise of the strategic religious engagement tool also has taken away tools for our diplomats and service members to understand the dynamics that Peter talked about. So there's a lot that Congress needs to do to ensure that the executive branch is enacting the law that Congress passed and previous executives have signed into law, as well as engaging these countries bilaterally through the different mechanisms that appropriations and direct foreign engagement provide.
Thank you, Knox. Jewher, specifically regarding Uyghurs who are being repressed and enslaved by the CCP, how do you think the U.S. can hold China accountable? Is it through sanctions, tariffs, better enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, or something else?
When we're talking about the persecution of the Uyghurs, we have to talk about the root problem, right? Why has it gone on for so long? That's because the Chinese government is very much able to profit off the whole persecution. The longer the Chinese government can profit off mass incarceration, can by profiting off state-imposed forced labor, the longer the Chinese government will continue doing so and will even expand. And we are already seeing the expansion. We see the Chinese government working with the North Korean government regarding state-imposed forced labor, and they're trying to introduce such programs to other parts of the world through the Belt and Road Initiative, like Partners of Belt and Road Initiative initiatives. And it is wonderful that the U.S. government passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that basically has a regional focus, bans anything that's coming in to the U.S. border that's from the Uyghur region, with even if it's partially made. And in fact, in a little over 1 week, it will be 4-year anniversary of the implementation. And the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is currently one of the most important and strongest labor law that's addressed to Uyghur forced labor. And it is still one of the most important regulatory tool globally for combating state-imposed forced labor that is hurting the Uyghur community. And recent research have found that the law has already changed the behavior and attitude of corporations because it created a legal and financial consequences for non-compliance. And many corporations have slowly shifted their sourcing and also started mapping their supply chains. However, things cannot stop here, right? Uyghur people are still being persecuted, and it is important that the enforcement level continue to be strong. I was a bit concerned because since last January, we've seen a slowing down of the enforcement level of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We've seen that there has been no entity been added to the entity list, which is like a sanction list, since last January as well, even though we have labor rights organizations, researchers who have continuously submitted ongoing evidence to suggest an expansion list. And really, in order for the persecution of the Uyghur people to end, but also to protect American businesses' interests, and it is important for the U.S. government to continue adding new entities to the UFLPA entity list based on available evidence, and also address third country rerouting, because what happens is many companies, once they get caught at the US border, what they do is instead of saying, hey, I've done wrong, what they do is they reroute it to another country like Canada, like Australia, like New Zealand, like anywhere that will accept their shipments. And so it's important to have regulations that will circumvent that supply chain circumvention. And expansion of a high priority sector is important too. We know that cotton industry, tomato industry, hair industry, and beauty industry all are linked to Uyghur forced labor. But the high priority sector is so much more. We have identified at least 43 sectors that are heavily linked to Uyghur forced labor. And now we know that some of the newer sectors, including minerals and metals such as titanium, beryllium, copper, gold, and magnesium, and other exposed sectors. Critical mineral, we know it's a very hot topic now, and the Uyghur region supplies a very high percentage of global critical mineral supply. So it is very important that the attitude and the position towards Uyghur forced labor does not get shifted because of domestic politics change or diplomatic changes.
Thank you so much, Jewher. Olivia, administrations of both parties generally choose to not engage Pyongyang on religious freedom and human rights abuses, as the focus is on nuclear proliferation, quite a different topic. In your opinion, how could incorporating concerns about religious freedom and human rights fit into the nuclear disarmament discussions?
Yeah, great question. So for way too long, Washington has made a strategic error in making human rights and religious freedom concerns secondary to countering North Korea's nuclear ambitions. This, in my opinion, has left valuable leverage on the negotiating table while leaving the North Korean people to essentially suffer at the hands of the regime. The big question is, why does it advance U.S. interests to tackle human rights challenges in North Korea? And I think at root, it's because the regime relies on human rights violations as a means of maintaining power in a not dissimilar way to how it relies on its nuclear and missile programs to maintain its grip on power. It does so by exploiting its citizens, by generating profit through forced labor abroad and at home. It does so by refining its nuclear and missile programs through the use of prison camp labor, which is free labor to the regime. And it even allegedly tests chemical and biological weapons on vulnerable populations throughout North Korea, and even essentially garners acquiescence from the North Korean population by saying, we will send 3 generations of your family to a political prison camp where you have almost certain death. That kind of threat is enough to make people not speak out. By undermining a critical source of the regime's power and profit, by tackling the human rights issues, by tackling the religious freedom issues, we can make progress that keeps America secure and also keeps the North Korean people safe. These ideas are not mutually exclusive. So how do we go about doing that? I have 5 separate, very brief ideas. First, we need to issue an atrocity determination from the U.S. government, saying whether the North Korean people continue to face ongoing crimes against humanity, as was credibly established by the UN all the way back in 2014. But we should consider going beyond that and looking into whether the North Korean people, such as North Korean Christians, face genocide as well. And I think there's good, credible evidence for this, but I've seen the power of an atrocity determination in the case of the Uyghur people and how that galvanized the energy and attention that we needed to get the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act passed and a lot of other really substantive policy and action. So I think we need a recentering moment for the North Korean human rights community, not unlike the one that we saw for Uyghurs. Second, and this kind of picks up on what Knox was saying, we need to issue unique sanctions again for religious freedom and human rights violations. GLOMAG sanctions have gone underutilized. The sanctions that should be triggered by the CPC designations are not being used for unique sanctions. In the North Korean case, all of those sanctions are subservient to Jackson-Vanik sanctions. So they're essentially double-hatted, which means North Korea receives no unique sanctions for its religious freedom violations. That's unacceptable, especially when there are many sanctions targets that are ripe for sanctioning. Third, we need to appoint both a special envoy for North Korean human rights as well as an ambassador at large for international religious freedom. That position has remained vacant. That results in a lack of leadership, a lack of emphasis, and a lack of ability to get things meaningfully done. We need that person to be appointed soon, because without it, I worry about the void that is left behind when it comes not just to religious freedom issues, but to human rights issues, because we saw the power of Sam Brownback in being able to bring along issues that I think all of our communities care about that go even beyond religious freedom, but he used his platform to do that so well. Fourth, we need to strengthen information access efforts. This is not necessarily unique only to North Korea, but also in China too. There used to be many grants that were available to civil society to be able to engage in information access efforts that promoted access to religious information as well as non-religious information that allows people access to truth. I sit on the board for Radio Free Asia. Radio Free Asia is an incredibly important conduit for information access all across the globe in closed societies. We need to be supporting more of that, not withdrawing support for that. It's one of the ways that we signal U.S. support for freedom and people who are persecuted around the world, rather than ceding ground to authoritarians like North Korea and China who would like to rewrite history and say that America is a bad country. Fifth, and finally, in the North Korea-specific context, we need Congress to lead again. We need them to take up the North Korean Human Rights Act, which has not been reauthorized for many, many years. That act created more grants for information access. It helped spur on government attention to the issue. It even created the special envoy for North Korean human rights. It needs to be reauthorized. And we need more folks like Senator Coons to come up here and speak boldly on behalf of the North Korean people, but also boldly in general on religious freedom.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Peter, to quickly wrap us up, you've been involved in strategic religious engagement when at the State Department and USAID. Considering the changes over the past 18 months, how can the U.S. government today best understand how the axis of upheaval manipulates faith for their strategic purposes?
So you heard Knox a moment ago refer to what he called the strategic religious engagement function. And this is a capacity that the U.S. government has cultivated over the last 30 to 40 years within USAID, within the State Department, within government adjacent spaces such as the U.S. Institute of Peace. Separate from promoting international religious freedom, this is about the capacity to understand religious dynamics around the world and for the U.S. government to engage and partner profitably with religious actors, faith-based organizations around the world to pursue and achieve mutual goals. As a result of the dismantlement of USAID, the closure of the U.S. Institute of Peace, and the reorganization of the State Department, however, all of the dedicated capacity offices, positions for that religious engagement function have disappeared. They haven't been deliberately targeted by this administration. They were simply collateral damage of the ways that those agencies have been dealt with by this administration. But unfortunately, what this means is that we're lacking this capacity in the U.S. government right now. And I think part of what I'm trying to get at is to say that as American foreign policy tries to think about the future of this country in the world, the future of the United States in a multipolar world, a post-liberal world, whatever you want to call it, I would contend that our support for religious freedom, America's comfort with religion more broadly, is a distinctive part of the American value proposition. And in order for us to be able to navigate and leverage those capacities, we need to have that ability for our diplomats, our foreign affairs specialists to understand and engage religion. And so we're here on the Hill, and so those of you who have those oversight capacities would love to see you asking some of the executive branch agencies how they're thinking about the future of religious literacy capacity within our foreign affairs agencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much to all my panelists. I loved everyone's recommendations, how they didn't just touch on international religious freedom, but they were quite intertwined with other issues going on around the world that are extremely important, and that I'm sure that a lot of people in our audience here specialize in. So thank you all, and thank you all for being here today. We greatly appreciate it. And I just want to send you out with a charge to keep focusing on religious freedom, keep it on your radars, because it's an extremely important human rights issue that we all care about. So thank you again.